Adam, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Mate, thank you so much for having me, man. You had some incredible guests, so I'm glad to be added to your list.
Yeah, just another incredible guest right now. And I'm excited to dive into this because I think you might be the first Australian guest from the podcast. And that's it's a pretty big honor. And so I'm excited.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll represent the country. There's only like 25 or 26 million of us, not as many as the US, but I'm happily be the first.
Hell yeah. So, one thing I noticed when doing research for this conversation with you and your partner, Jonesy, who is usually right by your side in all interviews, except for this one, was a commonality that you guys both have such wide ranging interests. He mentions he was at one point Study Jones and Hippie Jones and Bender Jones. And you personally have had jobs in corporate banking, transport and logistics, digital marketing, and have played around with a bunch of different degrees as well. And so I'm curious, just starting off the bat, how much of that wide-ranging interest has served you for the podcast and for what you've been doing for the past 5 years?
I think it's been enormous for the podcast. We definitely, when we started off, it was June 2016, and we were both at that stage super keen on business and side businesses and side projects. So like the first 30 episodes were like all about business, but then we started tapping into other areas of interest. Obviously the personal development stuff has always been there as well, but then we started tapping into going a little bit deeper into marketing. And then from marketing, there's like some psychology stuff in there as well, and some human behavior stuff. And then once we'd gone through that, then we're like, okay, well, actually, in terms of human behavior, there's some like philosophy and spirituality stuff. In terms of that, then there's all like this big pocket of history. So like we sort of like kept like branching out. The tree sort of kept expanding and branching out into different areas. So we've definitely been able to get a little taste of a whole bunch of different areas.
Yeah, and your niche is like book reviews, I would say, like if you were to put your podcast in a category. But from that, you get so many different, you can go down so many different rabbit holes, like you just said. And so do you regret that decision? Or are you happy? Would you have done the same thing if you were starting today of choosing a niche or going broad? What do you think there?
I definitely think if we had have got stuck in doing personal development and business books, we probably would have run out of steam in a sense that like having this broad range of interests has kept it interesting and kept it engaging. There's only so many times you can read the same thing over and over. A lot of the books tend to get a little bit repetitive, and like the first time you hear an idea, it's fantastic. The second time you hear the idea, yeah, that's great. The third time you hear the idea, oh yeah. The fourth time it's like, oh man, I've heard this before. So it's sort of like by having this new stuff, we're getting more of those super exciting first time ever hearing something sort of moments.
Yeah. Why do you love reading so much?
Well, I think for me, I got hooked. I was, I guess, a late onto the scene. It wasn't like I was reading all the time, but it was after I'd had a few years off from reading. Basically, I only read those high school books that you had to read. And then after high school finished, I didn't really read anything. 5 or 6 years later, I ended up reading one book, and the first book sort of helped me get a job. The second book I read sort of helped me start a business. The third book I read helped me get a girlfriend. And from there, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm 3 from 3, 100% strike rate. What other books are out there? That's when I sort of got hooked, got addicted to reading, and kept looking for more.
Yeah, with that third book, helping you get a girlfriend, tell that story because I think it's so funny.
Have you heard of the book The Game? Neil
Of
Strauss?
course. Yeah, The Game by Neil Strauss.
So it was when I was coming to the end of high school, so this must have been 2010, I reckon. There was a whole bunch of my high school mates that had been talking about this book. They was going out sarging. They were using all the acronyms, the DHVs. They were throwing some grenades to help each other out. There was like all these things where they were using all this language. And I was like, what is going on here? And they'd go out to like the shopping center on the weekend and then report back. They'd like write up a field report of how they'd gone from that weekend. So I was sort of like, I was getting sort of hooked. And because I was in an all boys school, I'd pretty much never seen a girl in my life, or at least never talked to one. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get The Game. I'm going to go out there and try and pick up some chicks. So then I bought this book. I thought I was buying the game so I could go and pick up chicks. But it turned out it was like this 30-day personal improvement program by Neil Strauss, but it was called The Rules of the Game. So I thought I was reading the game. I accidentally bought the wrong book. It turns out I think the rules of the game was pretty interesting though, like because it was just sort of like the game was obviously about the whole scene of the underground pickup artists, whereas the rules of the game was sort of more of, I guess, Neil Strauss's new take on it. So it was sort of like day one was, just like start to, get more confident in yourself. Day two, go and get a haircut. Day four, went to the shopping center to buy clothes for the first time that weren't picked out by my mum. And then like there was like a few different things throughout that you could practice those different days. And then I got to day 8, which was like go and talk to a girl for the first time. And there was a few things like from the book, the game, like the ring reading routine or the palm reading routine. So there was some of those things that I had up the sleeve that could then, just sort of help break the ice or something to go back to in the awkward moments. Anyway, it worked out fantastically. I didn't even read days 9 through 30 because I'm engaged to that girl now, 10 years later. The first girl I talked to, I ended up making out with her and still together since.
Dude, that is the craziest thing ever. Do you ever think to yourself, like, what if I just picked up the game instead of the rules of the game? Like, how different your life would be?
I know. I probably would have never because I would have been trying to use all these tricks and tactics and manipulations from the game, and I probably would have never found any girl. I would have been just trying and getting nowhere.
What did your friends say when you were telling them about the situation?
I thought it was hilarious. It was just like the book like almost worked too well. My plan was to go out there and meet a whole bunch of girls and like experiment and fun, like, use these different tricks to get a different girl every single night. I was like, man, this worked too well. I got one and that's it. I can't get rid of it.
That's hilarious. And that wasn't the only time you met someone in a social situation. You met Jonesy in meeting at a bar, which is a very interesting place for two readers to connect. So what happened there?
It's too funny, man. I was at university with some mates, just like going for like between classes, went to a bar, and then he was like sitting there by himself reading a book. And normally you'd think that person was a weirdo. Normally if I saw someone by themselves reading a book, I think, what the hell is wrong with that person? I forget it. He was either reading like, it was either Rich Dad, Poor Dad or the 4-Hour Work Week, something like that. It might've been the 4-Hour Work Week just because I was listening to Tim Ferriss a lot then. I just read the 4-Hour Work Week myself. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is kind of like a kindred spirit. This is like somebody that I can get along with. So I thought, well, I'm going to talk to this person. So it was a good, I guess, almost love at first sight, but in a very different way to the previous one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've now worked together for 5 years on this project. And I'm curious, what sorts of things do you think about when picking someone to work with on a long-term project? Or did you even think it would be a long-term project when you started?
We didn't think that at all. We definitely did not think that. We've had to develop that as we went along. The initial plan, we set a smaller goal than yours. I think I heard your initial goal was 100 episodes. Our initial goal was 10. So we're like, okay, let's do 10 episodes and see how we go. We started off because the plan was to do a book every single week. We read the first book, which was like super short. It was like 80 pages, Derek Sivers, Anything You Want. And then I think one of the early books we did was the 1 Minute Manager, which is also like super, super short, like 80 pages. But then there were some books we like wanted to do like 150-page book and we couldn't get it done within a week. So we had to like spread it out over 2 weeks. We did like a movie or a documentary in between, but we basically got to like episode 7 or 8 and we're like, oh, let's just keep going. And pretty much we've been doing one every week since then and haven't stopped.
What do you think it is that made you say, let's keep going? Because episode 7 or 8 is actually where I think 50% of podcasts drop off and don't produce another episode. So what do you think about it made you say, oh, let's keep going?
I think for us, it was just so many benefits. We didn't have anyone listening aside from like ourselves and our mums. That was about it at that point. So it wasn't like, oh man, we've got 1 million people who are listening to this every week. We better keep going. It was very much a personal, like intrinsically driven as opposed to extrinsically motivated. It was the idea that, okay, well, we both love reading books. we wanted to start this because we wanted to learn, firstly, the brand new skill of how to make a podcast, how to record, how to edit, where to put it up, all those kinds of things, which we kind of ticked off. But then we want to learn, to speak better, to listen better, to like structure our thoughts better, to obviously when we read the book, we're retaining a hell of a lot more by talking about it and by writing notes about it. It forced us to like increase our reading speed. So as I said at the start, we were struggling to read a 150 page book in a week. And then we were like reading a 300 page book in less than a week by that point then. So we were sort of like improving our rate of reading just because we said, okay, we know we have to do it by this weekend. So we better find some time or make some time to read this thing. So there were all these personal benefits, the speaking, the reading, the retention, all those things that made us think, okay, well, regardless of what happens, regardless if anyone ever listens or not, let's just keep going for it.
What's the most rewarding part of the process of recording an episode for you?
Honestly, I think the biggest part is probably the personal learning. So like whilst we're making an episode for other people to learn from, I think we're learning the most, in all honesty, just because, we'll take a 300 page book. We'll spend, 10 hours reading it. Then we'll spend like 8 hours, like sort of making notes about it. Then we'll like spend a couple of hours editing each other's notes, and then we'll structure it up. We'll change bits around. We'll just switch one of their stories for one of our stories. And then we'll obviously discuss it, and then we'll record it. Then we'll edit it. Then we'll listen back to it. So it's like we're forcing ourselves to read the same book like 6 or 8 times within the 1 week. So like whilst we're making this stuff for other people to learn from, I think we're learning the most out of it. That's for sure.
Do you ever get annoyed with a book, like a book that you might not have really liked, and you're having to go through it 6 to 8 times?
Oh yeah. Especially some of the ones that Jonesy picks. we take it in turns of like picking one each week now. Yeah, some of his that I just can't get around, that I think, oh man, this is a real battle to get through. But sometimes you got to get through it. Sometimes you're like pleasantly surprised. You get to the end. Sometimes there's actually books where like I'll read it, I'll get to the end, I'm like, yeah, it was all right. It was like a 4 out of 10. And then like you do the notes for it and you're like, oh, actually there was some good stuff in here. Like when you get the condensed version. So it's like, oh, this is like a 6 out of 10. And then like you do the episode and you're like, oh, that was like an 8 out of 10. That was kind of good. Sometimes it goes the other way, of course. But yeah, sometimes you get pleasantly surprised.
Do you ever feel like, wow, I'm devoting all this time to reading? Like, how do you balance reading and actually acting on the knowledge that you're reading?
That's a massive question, man. And I think the book, like, so we just wrote a book that is, I guess that putting that into action a lot more. So for us, it was about taking all the things that we'd done and all the things that we'd learned and combining them together in a new way. So it wasn't like brand new, groundbreaking, original stuff, but it was taking the best bits from 300 different books and mixing it into one book. So that was definitely like a big part in terms of like a project that we worked on that spent a year and a half to put together the book itself. It was also like we had to work on the planning or like the structuring of the whole book. We had to work on the marketing of the book. So like we're taking little bits and pieces from all these different sorts of books. So not only the content side, but then putting into action things like the marketing of the book and things like managing a team like who helped us put together the book and stuff like this. So like borrowing some lessons from the book to actually make the book.
What's it like to write a book with someone else?
Yeah, it was honestly, I think it was good to do something, to have a partner do it, something this size. This is a 170,000 word, 686 page book. That we thought, okay, this is like one that we need to do together. Because there's so many times, like in any project, like with the podcast as well, there's times where you want to give up. There's times where you want to quit and throw in the towel. When there's 2 people, the only time it's going to fail is if both people want to throw in the towel at the same time. So wow. Luckily, when I've been wanting to give up, Jonesy's been full steam ahead. And when Jonesy's wanted to give up, I've been like, no, man, let's keep going. So we've like both driven each other on. There's never been a time where we both wanted to quit at the same time.
Wow. It's built-in accountability. That's so fascinating. Yeah. What would you recommend for someone who's trying to find that person, that Jonesy in their own life?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be tough. Like, there's definitely projects I've started with other mates that haven't lasted, obviously. So sometimes sometimes a really, really close friend isn't the best person to do it with. For us, like, because we sort of knew each other and we'd hung out a little bit, and then we'd just had that shared interest of reading books, but it wasn't like we were best mates at that time. So it was probably like far enough away from like the inner circle of best mates that made it not like, it wasn't mixing sort of friendship with business so much. It was more like a business focus, and then the friendship came later. So that's probably one part of it. At the same time, so whilst I wouldn't recommend your best friend, well, obviously it might be, it might be perfect, but probably in the majority of cases, I wouldn't recommend your best friend. And also in the majority of cases, I wouldn't recommend a total stranger either, just because you don't know what they're like or what their personalities are like. I think having that sort of middle ground, someone you know well enough, but not too well, that you're always curious to find out more about them, I think is probably the right mix of how far away the friend should be.
What made you so curious to find out more about Jonesy?
Jonesy was a character. He'd gone through a bit of a ride of his own. He'd never read the game, but he seemed to embody the lifestyle of the game in the early days as well. So that was definitely one intriguing part of it. He was like this long-haired surfer dude who seemed to just get along well with everybody. He'd find something to talk about with everybody. So that was probably some of the early things that got me curious about the Jones man. He also had like a wild backstory where he was a pack-a-day smoker, and he managed to read one book and turn it around. He quit his smoking. And so he was like this strange mix of intense party person, but also this intensely studied, academic, rigorous, like structural engineer. So he had both worlds where he's super intense that seemed to like not mesh, but somehow they did.
That's fascinating. So what do you do now? Like, what's your day-to-day job look like when you're not writing the book and recording the podcast?
2020, I suppose, was a weird year for everybody, but for myself in particular as well. So I was working full-time in a digital marketing agency. So I was doing that full-time, sort of, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, pretty standard stuff. I was also doing the podcast every week as well. So reading a book, taking those notes, putting together episodes, recording the episodes, all that stuff of running a weekly podcast. Plus, we were writing this book, which was a serious endeavor as well. That involved sort of like getting up 2 hours earlier every morning to like write for an hour and a half, 2 hours every morning to try to get it all together. Plus, I was teaching a podcast course in the UK for like a university where they used to do this community outreach program. They said this year we can't do it, so we're going to do a podcast. Can you teach us how to do it? So that was like an 8-week podcasting course. Plus, a company hired me as like a freelancer to write a book for them, like a company history book. So I was writing another like 40,000 word book at the same time about this company's like 6th-generation family history of how they'd come across as immigrants, in the 1800s and built up this massive company. Plus, then I also worked with a dentist association to launch their podcast. So it was like there was a lot going on. Is what I'm trying to say. I had my full-time day job, plus a podcast, plus a couple of books, plus another couple of podcasts. And yeah, there was a bit going on. What
do you have to give up in order to do all those things?
Well, I think the easiest thing was because we were in, the COVID crisis. I was kind of forced. It was in where I live in Melbourne. There was like a 14-week stretch where we were just at home. Like you couldn't go more than 5Ks. You couldn't go out. You couldn't see people. I didn't play footy at all last year. There was, you couldn't go out to bars. You couldn't go out drinking. There was all these things that you couldn't do, which normally I would have had to give up, but it was almost like forced that I had to give it up. So I guess got lucky in a sense that there was nothing else to do. So now it's sort of like, now I've got to find, now that we're slowly making our way back to more of that. We're not there yet. I don't know what it's like for you guys. We're not quite there yet, but we're slowly making our way back. Now I'll have to actually make some sacrifices.
Yeah. How do you think about making sacrifices, and which sacrifices to make, or things to cut out or keep going with the new way the world is moving back to a new normal?
Yeah. Well, I suppose I've got these two book projects are kind of almost done. Like one's done, the one I did for the other company, that's done. This book, we've finished writing it. Now we're just sort of putting the finishing touches on promoting it and getting it out there, and that'll be almost done as well. So now I've probably got the choice. I'm going to have this like gap in my schedule. I guess my choice is going to be, do I do more of those personal or social or hobby type of things, or do I take on another big project? I suppose that's the choice coming up for me soon.
Adam, you seem like, I can't tell if it's because you're from Australia, but you seem like such a good natured guy. And I'm curious if that's something you've learned or always been brought up with. Where do you think your good natured energy comes from?
Mate, thank you very much. First of all, I think that's definitely one I'd like to be able to have, and I'm glad it comes across that way. I think I'd have to give credit to my parents, definitely. So definitely to mum and dad for always wanting to bring up a son in that way. I think I had a yeah, I think just wanting to be that way is important. I've definitely heard other people talking about it, even Gary V, who you've had on the podcast. I've heard him talking about, being a good person as one of the core things, like forgetting about the business success and making lots of money, that's one of the core things. So I think that's something that's definitely within your control. If you think one of the things that we've read a bit about is like Stoicism, and in Stoic philosophy, they often break things up into either you have control over it or you don't have control over it. There's a lot of times in business, there's a lot of luck involved. You can do everything perfectly. You can make a perfect product, market it in a great way, but for whatever reason, the timing's just wrong. Like if you launched something just before COVID struck and you couldn't cut through the noise, even if everything else went right, that thing was totally out of your control. Whereas like if you think of some things that are completely inside your control, then like I think being a good person is definitely one of those. I think I was lucky that I was born on a farm, so I've got family who are like farmers in regional parts of Australia, like in the bush or in the outback. I also lived for 3 years in Papua New Guinea, so I think I've had like this broad range of experiences that I guess I've met a whole bunch of different people and realized that that's pretty important, just to try to be a good person before anything else.
What was growing up on a farm like?
Yeah, I like to. It was early days. It was early days. I get back there a couple of times each year. Probably not as much as I'd like. It's definitely different to the city. I don't think anyone from the city here would understand it without ever going there. It's just completely different. Like you're on your own. The neighbor here. Like if I look right now to my next door neighbor, I can see their window right there. Thankfully, they got their blinds shut, so I can't see what they're cooking for breakfast. Compare that to the farm, though. The next neighbor's like 20 miles away, and you're like, well, it's just you. You're on your own. You're sort of fighting for yourself. It's not obviously like it's not like you're in the absolute middle of nowhere and you're like killing your own cows and milking your own milk. Like you're still part of society, but it's just a very different way of living. That's for sure.
I'm trying to think if farms are the way we were raised to live or cities, because when I think about it, like hunter and gatherers needed to be in a tribe and be very close together. But in some sense, that feels more like farm life, but at the same time, you're describing it as far apart. So what do you think about that? Where do you think yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's almost those two different extremes. Like the Dunbar's number 150. That was like the anthropologist who found that like 150 seems to be the perfect number of the size of a community. If you've got more than 150 people, it's sort of too hard to keep up with everybody, to know who's who and know who's doing what. So 150 seems to be the right number. Obviously, you got cities with millions of people, or on the other end of the spectrum, you got farms with a family of 6 or 8. So maybe they're both wrong. Maybe we got to find a new path forward to get to that 150 somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, could you imagine just building up cities of 150 people? and it sounds so crazy, but like, could that actually work? Is that where the future is potentially going? Who knows?
I don't know. I think it's probably finding everyone's obviously got their own smaller clan within a city, but I always find it amazing when I'm after reading some of the books that we've read around like the ancient history or ancient civilizations. And then you walk around the city and you'll see thousands of people in the city every day, just strange faces you've never seen before and you'll never see again. It's pretty crazy just how many people are out there and crammed into one small geographic area.
It freaks me out sometimes, to be honest with you.
Definitely, definitely.
So going back to your book, The Shit They Never Taught You, what do you want someone to learn or pick up from reading this book?
Yeah, well, what we've sort of done to craft this book is we've got 115 chapters, which are all based off a different book. We've grouped those into 32 different lessons, and then those 32 lessons are then grouped into 9 different parts. So we'll have a part on personal development, a part on business, a part on marketing, a part on personal finances, a part on philosophy. And then within each of those is different lessons. Within each of those is different chapters. And so what we sort of set out is you don't have to read it all front to back. If you've got a specific interest, if either if you love business and you want to just read business, or you've never heard anything about business and you're interested, then skip to that section and just read that. Of course, read anything that tickles your fancy, but we kind of want to say, find the areas that you're interested in and read more about them as just a way of saying, hey, this is what sort of books can do. If you've got a specific challenge, there's probably a book out there where somebody's gone through that same challenge, found a solution, and now they've written a book about it. Like the game. How do you can't get a girlfriend? Well, go and read the rules of the game. There's a step-by-step game plan of how to do it. Or something. If you don't know how to get an idea to start a business, then there's certain books on just getting ideas for business. So that's probably the main thing that we want to get, rather than any specific lesson, is just saying that, hey, there's so many books out there with so much wisdom. If you're banging your head against the brick wall, can't find a solution, you're doing things over and over and over again, and just wondering what's going on, there's probably a book out there that's done, somebody who's gone through what you've gone through, they've got to the other side, and now they're giving you a map.
Yeah, I think about it everything we're experiencing today is because of people for the past thousands of years have built everything that exists in this moment. And likewise to the situations. In your specific situation, someone has dealt with that as well. So I couldn't agree more. Is there any section of the book, because it's so wide ranging, like your own interests, that you're really excited about today? What part of the book are you most excited about if you were to go to a random chapter, or which one are you most excited about writing?
I think my favorite one, it's lesson 7. It's called The Various Paths to Mastery. I think it was my favorite to write because what we did there was a few books in terms of career. It's in the career section. There's a few books that say, hey, this is the way to get a good career, and they give you the path. And then there's some other books that actually say, hey, this is the way to get the perfect career. And they're both right, but they're both totally opposite. So we called it going wide versus going deep. So you've got going deep, which is picking one thing, committing to it, working really, really hard at this one thing, and becoming the best in the world at this one thing. So this is books like Outliers, Grit, Mastery. These are all saying, hey, go deep, pick something and get really, really, really good at it. And then there's also books like Range and Originals, which are saying, okay, go wide, try a whole bunch of different things. And sort of at the end, you'll be the best in the world at this random niche mix of 6 different things combined into one. So it's they're both kind of saying, this is how to get the perfect career, but both in the almost exact opposite direction, but they're both correct. So that was probably my favorite chapter, or my favorite lesson to write, just because we took all those different ideas and tried to find, okay, well, what's the right answer?
I think it could be really confusing for someone, right? If you read Range and then you read Outliers and you're like, what am I supposed to do here? These are such smart people, David Epstein and Malcolm Gladwell, telling me basically opposite things. How can I hold these together? But that's really fascinating that you managed to do that. And so what's your take on it?
Well, I've obviously gone the Range path. As you said in the intro, I've done a few different courses, a few different jobs. As I mentioned, a few different projects last year even. I'm definitely taking the Range path myself. But also within that, so within the overarching, I guess, framework of going wide, there's also times where you got to go deep within that as well. So like you got to take that outliers, the 10,000 hours approach. So like obviously the podcast is something we've gone deep on. It's taken us 5 years and we've still got like, there's no end in sight. The book was like a 18-month project that we got to the end of. So like we're going deep within podcasting, deep within writing, whilst also going wide overall, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what I feel like you guys have done is, from reading all these books, from learning about everything, you've learned how to learn. Is that accurate from your perspective? And if so, what are some of the things you would tell someone who wants to learn how to learn better?
I think that's vital, man. I think that's absolutely vitally important. Like I was saying, like we're the ones who are getting the most out of the podcast. As much as other people are listening and enjoying it, we're definitely getting the most out of it because we're learning. Same as writing the book. I know Seth Godin, he always says like the book that's going to have the biggest impact on you isn't any book you read, it's the book you write. Same as, the podcast that's going to change your life is a podcast you make, not the podcast you listen to. So there's definitely that element of it, that doing is the best way of learning. But at the same time as well, there's so much information out there that you can take in. And for us, it has been an ongoing process where at the start, we weren't really learning that much. You're reading books, you get to the end of a book and you flick back and you think, what did I even just read? Like, what did I pick up from that? Like you've gone through a whole book, you've read 150 pages, but you couldn't even tell anyone like one bit that you'd learned from it. So like the podcast for us was a way of forcing ourselves to like have written down, here's all the things that we learned from it. Here's the best bits. So that's been an ongoing process. I think to answer your question of like advice for somebody else, definitely following your curiosity, definitely finding the mediums that work best for you, whether that's reading, listening, watching. There's just so much out there that you can take anything, whatever medium you want, whether it's books or podcasts or videos, online courses. There's so much you can learn if you go about it intentionally. Like you want to go out there and learn, find something specific. So follow your curiosity. 2, find out which way is best for you. And then I think 3 is then moving along sort of like the action curve, I guess. 1 is like passively reading it, so like you're consuming information, like you're taking it in. The next is probably like curating, which is like what we do on the podcast. Like, so we've taken in this information. We're sort of like sharing now the best bits of that book. And then like the final version is probably like creating, which is like putting that out into the world, doing something with it, coming up with some of your own unique thoughts, applying that information you take it in to your own situation.
What's been the biggest unexpected benefit to starting the podcast?
Without doubt, has been becoming a podcaster, if that makes sense. So there's just like so many things that come with that. There's like first of all, it's forced us to talk in a way that we're meant to be like sharing information, like teaching somebody every single week. So just doing that every week for 5 years just changes the way you talk. That's for sure. Also the confidence, I guess, that comes with it. I know it's only 2 dudes sitting in a room with microphones. It's not like we're speaking to a stadium full of people, like I know you're going to do it at episode 500. So it's not like you're speaking to a stadium, but there's almost like a stadium full of people listening, even though you can't see them or hear them or interact with them. But that's sort of like, I guess, the confidence that comes with that, but also then the confidence that comes with being the type of person who starts a project, who does a project, who follows through on a project. Also for us as well, the type of person who reads a book every week and learns so much stuff just gives you some extra confidence as well.
Were there any periods of your life when you weren't someone who would follow through with certain projects? And if so, could you take us back to those moments?
Yeah, I think I was definitely lucky with the types of people that I'd met. As I said, in high school, I met that group of guys that were deep into the game. There was also like a subsection of guys who were deep into business, like really early, like high school kids who were starting businesses. High school kids that were either doing, I had one mate who had some like weird upside down tomato thing that grows in a jar. I didn't really get it, but it was like some infomercial type product that he'd managed to find a knockoff version of and sell on eBay and make a whole bunch of money. I had another mate who was doing similar stuff with, like, he'd buy old Xboxes that had broken down and then like get the warranty on them to get a new one and then sell the new one. Like there was like guys doing stuff like this where like I was exposed to that in high school. And that sort of gave me the itch. That gave me the itch to go out and try some stuff. I had a lot of flops along the way, but I think I was always trying stuff. I went when I first started university was probably the one time where I'd stopped trying stuff. Like my big focus on high school was getting those grades. In hindsight, I probably didn't need to bother so much, but that was where I was at the time. In university, then I was like, okay, well, high school's done, university sort of we can go and have fun now. And so I probably took the foot off the pedal a bit there. And it wasn't until I started like sort of I didn't enjoy it. I started doing physiotherapy. I didn't enjoy it at all. And so I was probably just like, I took the foot off the accelerator in almost in all areas, really, in the study level, in the career level, in the like side projects level. So it wasn't until I sort of started getting back onto a path that I was more interested in that I sort of started recommitting to some of those paths.
Yeah. How did you go from off the gas pedal to back on? Because I think that's something that a lot of people could benefit from.
I think an important thing is to realize why the foot is off the pedal. So realize why, okay, for me, I was studying physiotherapy. When studying physiotherapy is a stretch because I wasn't studying. I was enrolled in physiotherapy and I showed up a couple of times a week, but I wasn't studying physiotherapy. And so, I had like a casual job on the side, but I wasn't really doing anything else. And I think the reason was like I was doing physio, which I thought I'd always wanted to do in high school. That's just all I assumed that I wanted to do because I liked sport. Turns out there's not that much sport in physio, but I wasn't enjoying it. And because I wasn't enjoying that, then I sort of had less energy. I was sort of like drained from doing that. So then I couldn't do stuff afterwards. Like I couldn't do the side projects after going to uni. On the weekends, I wasn't that engaged. I wasn't that interested. So I think it was like realizing that almost like that was the cause, that doing something that I wasn't that interested in was sort of sapping my energy away from everything else. And so then the hard part is to make a decision to do something about it. So that was when I probably, I wish I could say that I just like decided. And then the next day I walked in there and made the jump and it changed overnight. I probably dragged it out longer than it should have. Like it was probably like, I was like, okay, I'm halfway through the semester. I'll finish off semester. And then like, okay, I finished exams. Maybe it was just because I was stressed for exams that I wasn't enjoying it. I'll take this like 4-week holiday break now. And then like, I'm sure next semester will be better. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, well, it's just the first week. I'm sure like the first week's just introductory stuff. It'll get better. And then you're like, oh, well, I've got an assessment coming up. So I may as well finish this off so anyway, eventually like 2 months later, I finally actually pulled the pin and actually just walked in there and I said, look, I'm not enjoying this. I'm going to take the rest of the semester off. And they were really good about it. They're like, look, you've passed first semester. The spot's here. You can take a year off. If you want to come back in a year, you just pick up where you left off. If not, go and do something else. Good luck to you. So that was sort of good that I then had like, I had that in my back pocket. Like I wasn't just like quitting and I was out back to nothing, starting from scratch. I always had that in my back pocket that if in 12 months time, nothing else picked up, then I could always go back to it.
So then what happened?
So then I had to think, well, what do I want to do? Because it's like, it's easy to say, I don't want to do this, but it's a lot harder to say, well, what do you actually want to do? And so that's when I sort of had to go on a bit of exploration to find what I wanted to do. I had at the same time as well, I started dealing poker at the casino as well. So that was kind of like a good gap filler as well. Because I enjoyed doing that. It was a full-time job as well. So like forced me to have some structure. It wasn't like I just like, quit studying and then was sitting on the couch every day waiting for inspiration to hit me. It was like, well, you're going to have to go out and do something whilst you're also trying to work out what you're going to do next. And yeah, it was a matter of like talking to people, like talking to old teachers, talking to old family friends, talking to other various different mentors, and trying to work out what next. I decided that I wanted to go more towards business, marketing, commerce sort of stuff. So I enrolled in that for the following semester. But I also started some businesses on the side as well. So I started a tutoring business where during high school, like when I was in year 10, I did like maths tutoring for year 7s and 8s. And then like when I was in year 12, I was doing year 9s and 10s. And then when I'd finished, I was like doing year 11s and 12s. And then so like I was like tutoring like, $30 an hour one-on-one. And then I was like doing that for like 15 different people every week. But it was taking me like 25 hours because I like traveled to their house and stuff like that. And I do like 2 on one night and then 3 on another night. So it was like all week, even though it was only like 15 hours. But then I was like, well, I've got 15 people and every week I'm teaching these same 15 people, same stuff, 15 different times. If I can get all these 15 people into one room and like they can pay the same amount, I'll give them 3 times as much time. Like instead of 1 hour, they can get 3 hours. They can pay me the same. So I'll get the same amount of work. Instead of 15 hours of work, I'm going to do 3 hours of work. I was like, well, it's kind of like a win-win-win for everybody. So that's when I was like, okay, if I can try to do some of these group sort of tutoring sessions, it's going to be better for me, and I'm doing less work for the same money, and I'm not repeating myself over and over. It's going to be better for them because instead of 1 hour, they're going to get 3 times as much of my time. And obviously better for the parents as well, because they always like to think, well, they're getting better value out of it too, because they're the ones paying at the end of the day. So that was sort of the next project. I say 15, but my first ever lecture was 2. So I had 2 people come to the first group lecture. So that was I don't know if you can call that a group lecture. But then like the next one was 4, the next one was 7, then the next one, I finally got to my 15. In the end, like I did it for like 3 or 4 years. And the biggest one I did was like 180 kids came to like a university lecture hall in the middle of summer holidays because they were super keen. So like from that 2, I'd managed to build it up over a couple of years to 180. So I finally got to that point where it made sense.
What makes for a good tutor?
And I was shocking at the start, that's for sure. At the start, it was very much like basically I was there to do their homework, which was like the worst. It's like they've got the questions. They're like, okay, here's the sheet of questions I need to do for my homework. Let's go through it. That's like a waste of everybody's time. It's like, I'm doing like year 7 maths. Why am I doing this? You're not learning anything. I'm just giving you the answers. So definitely not that. What I found was like a next level better than that was like, they do the homework first. And then instead of us doing 20 questions together, they'd be like, okay, these are the 3 that I got stuck on. So then at least you're not like, that's like, you're taking more control over the time. You're not like inefficiently wasting time. You're like focusing that time on the most important stuff. The stuff that they got right, they already get it. You don't have to teach them that. Then I think the next best level after that was like almost like showing them the path. So rather than like going backwards and what did you get stuck on that's trying to fix it, we're sort of like more looking forwards, like sort of like, here's what's coming up. How can we get ahead? How can I sort of show you the hurdles before you get to them so that you're ready to jump over that hurdle once you get there? So I think that was sort of like the best part as well. And I'm trying to think, how can I link this back to like the podcast and the book as well? It's probably like thinking about like structuring a podcast episode too. Like, so we're not, the least efficient way would be to like read out the book word for word from the book onto the podcast, because that's just like saying, here's everything you need to know. Let's just go through all of it together. That's not very efficient at all. The second level is then probably like taking the best bits, saying, okay, you can skip all this stuff. You already know this. Here's just the best bits that you need to know. And then like the third level is then like putting everything together to say, okay, well, you got outliers over here. You got range over here. There's like, here's the 2 different paths. Let me show you the way that you can try to mix both of these together. So you're not just reading one book, you're getting the best bits and the synergy of both books.
Yeah, because that's what you're doing, right? You're being a tutor for the podcast like you were doing earlier in your career. So it's very fascinating how those actually do connect.
I literally never thought of it until the last 15 minutes we've been talking about this topic. But yeah, I suppose it probably did help. That's part of range as well, range, doing a whole bunch of different things that come back and help you out later.
So what's the difference between talking to a single person versus a group lecture?
Yeah, that is important because a lot of people do like the individual direct attention. That's for sure. There are some people that would rather pay extra just to have it solo. I think part of that is obviously the idea of just like having this one-to-one of like, you're showing me exactly what I need. So it feels like it's better. Also, part of that is probably like just the nerves of like being with a group of other people, and then if someone calls on you in class and you get the wrong answer, it feels like crap. So there's like probably that element of it as well. But I think like what I worked out was there was some people that just like the lectures. So I do it like once per term, like once every 10 weeks. We do like 10 weeks worth of stuff in one lecture. There's people that liked that. There's people that liked just the individual only and hated coming to the lectures. And then there was probably the majority of people that liked a little bit of both. So they liked the idea of coming to the lecture, getting ahead, learning as much as possible in a short amount of time. So spending one day to learn 10 weeks worth of stuff. They love that idea. But then they also like the idea of someone to like hold their hand through when they got stuck. And so most people, I probably did that, the once-off lectures plus the ongoing one-on-one. But what they probably found was that like they didn't need me every single week. They probably only needed me once every 3 weeks or something, which again is better for them. It's better for me as well, in the sense, so like it showed that I was like teaching them enough stuff that they didn't need me all the time. Better for the parents' back pocket, of course. And then like probably better for the kids' confidence as well, that like they're not relying on someone to come every week and hold their hand and show them exactly what they need. That, hey, for most of the time they can do it on themselves. When they need me, they can call on me and I'll come and help them out.
And you mentioned that you had some flops prior, I guess maybe in high school. And I was curious what those were.
Oh man, I had some flops all throughout. Even still, I've got some flops. It wasn't just in high school, that's for sure. Some of the guys I was talking about who were doing the tomatoes and the Xboxes and stuff, the next thing that they got into was like Kindle Publishing. So like ebooks. So there was like a bit of a boom in ebooks where like you could get someone from, a third world country who could pay for really cheap. They'd write the book. You'd just like package it up and market the book. You could end up having like 180 different books, so that even if you sold one copy every day, like the numbers just worked out because you just had so many dodgy little crappy books. So that's kind of like one thing I got into that just didn't work. I think I was a bit more like idealistic, that I was like, I don't want a crappy book. I want to do a better book. But then that takes too much effort that it doesn't actually end up to, you can't ever get to the point where you've got 180 good books. You need 180 crappy, quick little books. So that was definitely a big flop for me, because I never employed the right strategy, or I never wanted to employ the right strategy to make that system work. We also, actually, this is the first, was it the first? It might not have been the first, but one of the projects Jonesy and I did together was sort of like borrowing from this as well, was we got into this Kindle Publishing, doing stuff together. We wanted to sell some essential oils, and we thought, okay, well, essential oils, let's like start with like the information of the Kindle ebooks where we can make money off that, then use that money to buy the oils and then sell the oils to make even more money. And anyway, that was just like, it was just like a 4-hour work week gone wrong type of thing. Like where we'd read the 4-hour work week and we thought, this is the perfect way to do it. We'll just be like, within 3 months, we'll be lying on the beach in our hammock with a laptop and just sipping on margaritas while everybody around the world's buying our essential oils. So that was definitely a big flop. A sock club was one thing when I started working in the city full time, and I think like most blokes, wasn't that interested in shopping. So I probably had the same 5 pairs of socks that I wore on rotation Monday through Friday, and then washed on the weekend, and then wore them again. But then like, people were wearing more and more fancy socks. You had your old school bankers that were just wearing your standard black or your standard gray. But then you had sort of the young up and comers that like mixed it up with a few fluoro socks or like the animal prints on their socks. So I was like, oh yeah, this seems to be a thing. I went out to on Alibaba to try to find some Chinese supplier of some cheap socks. And I was like, okay, well, if I can get 100 people signed up to this thing to pay like $10 a month, and then like I buy these socks for like 30 cents each, but I've like there was like a minimum number that I had to buy, so there was a certain amount where I needed to that made it worth it. Okay, so I was like, okay, well, if I need all this, surely there's other blokes out there that hate shopping but want to have cool new socks land in their mailbox every month. So that was sort of like the one thing I tried to do, like try to set myself up with supplier, set myself up with customers. Again, it was like it was going to be the ultimate 4-hour work week where they just paid me every single month, and then I sent them out a pair of socks. I think I got two. I got two signed up. Maybe one. I forget. It was either one or two. I think it must have been two. Like I was trying like Facebook ads. I printed off flyers. I hired some friends to like walk around the city and like hand out flyers to all the different offices. But yeah, I ended up getting two people signed up. And so I basically I got their $10 each. And I just said, what I had like 8 samples that had come through from China. So I just like sent them half each and said, thanks for signing up, but sorry, it's not happening here. Enjoy these crappy socks.
What commonalities do you find in these flops, and what commonalities do you find in things that actually have worked out, like the podcast and the book?
It just hit me all in one instant that the ones that didn't work were the ones where I was doing it purely for the financial gain and purely to like hack the system in some way where it just would like magically make tons of money, and I wouldn't have to work at all for it. They were all the ones that flopped. The magical silver bullet that would like fix all of your problems with none of the work. And then, of course, the ones that did work were the ones where I probably like wasn't even interested in the money. I was more interested in the personal gains. I was interested in learning more, or like learning a new skill, or putting together like a premium book. And it turns out that they were the ones that worked.
It's so fascinating how that works out, because, I'm looking at your Kindle story, like you're going to do all these things on Kindle and find a way to make it work. And now you actually have a book on Kindle. I don't know if it's on Kindle, but you actually have a published book, which is crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
So just goes to show that following your curiosity, following your passion, that overused word, is sometimes the actual route to fulfillment and happiness.
Yeah. And I think definitely looking for any project as well, looking for what's the potential downside. So the downside is if obviously it doesn't work, you don't make any money, and it stops happening, you give up or you stop doing it. That's obviously the worst case scenario. So then you think, okay, well, what's the benefits you can get out of that worst case scenario? The benefits of the sock club failing was, I suppose, like partly was like to learn how to like market something brand new. So there's definitely some learning there. There was definitely like the contacts with like suppliers and stuff like that, like some things that I'd never done before that I learned along the way. But at the end of the day, there wasn't that much benefit that I got out of that. Compare that to like, say, a podcast where our 10 episodes were like, even if we stop after 10 and it doesn't work, at the very least, we've read 10 books. We've learned a shitload from those 10 books. We've learned how to make a podcast. We've practiced our speaking skills. We've got a little bit more confident. So there's like all these benefits that even if it doesn't work, you've got like 6 different things that you can say, well, this was at least what I got out of it. So I think if you can think of, okay, if worst case scenario, what's the downside? If that downside's still a win, then it's a good project to take on. If that downside is you've lost a shit ton of money and you've learned nothing, then that's a bad project to take on.
Yeah, that's a great framework. And on that same idea is like, what would you advise yourself 10 years from now? And I'm curious about this yourself. What do you think yourself 10 years from now would advise you to do? Interesting.
Well, I suppose it is like an important time now where I'm thinking about what do I do next? Like, what's the next project I take on? Do we double down on something on the podcast to make something more there? Or do I go and do like another personal project like the company history book? Or do I do something totally different? I think the advice is definitely to do something, not do nothing. So definitely the advice would not be, okay, you finished this massive project. You had a big year where you did 2 or 3 books, plus these courses, plus this podcast, blah, blah, blah. You can relax now, go and play Super Mario on the couch and watch some Netflix. That's definitely not going to be the advice. I think the advice is definitely going to be, probably rebalance a little bit towards like the personal side, like friendships and relationships. Definitely try to invest more in those. But at the same time, don't stop doing projects. So definitely keep looking for projects with that positive upside where the worst case scenario is still a win.
What types of projects in your ideal world would you take on next?
I think I think it probably comes down to range as well. I'm thinking more writing. I'm thinking probably personal. I think like we've been it was a brutal 18 months of putting this massive book together. And we sort of thought about, okay, are we going to do what's our next sort of group project based on the podcast going to be? And I think we sort of both land on the decision of let's like focus back on the podcast because we probably let that slip a little bit. Let's focus back on the podcast, improve that as much as possible over the next 6 months, get to the end of the year, and then reassess, which I think is probably what we're going to do. So that sort of like gives me the freedom to now think about, okay, what personal project should I take on? If another company history book fell in my lap that I could make some good coin on and do their book, I would do it 100%. I'd do it instantly. But it was like one of those complete black swan moments that you couldn't plan for, you couldn't predict. I couldn't make it happen. It just happened. It just fell in my lap. So yeah, that would be one that I would like to do. But I think one that I definitely will do is just some more personal writing. Definitely not 700-page books, but like a 120-page book that I do on my own.
That's beautiful, man. What did you learn about writing from this process of writing so much over the past year and a half?
We wrote and rewrote a lot this book. We started out, so we've got this free giveaway that we did. We called it the top 50 best books of all time, which was like our freebie to get onto the email list. We ranked our favorite books of all time. We gave it like a little teaser of each one, and that was pretty popular. Like I think it's a bit of a clickbaity title, but it's like at the same time it's pretty valuable for someone who's like, okay, I want to read books. What should I read next? Here's like our thoughts on the best stuff. So we did that maybe 2017, 2018. And then I think it was 2018. Yeah, the first one. Then we redid it. Like we re-updated it and switched out 20 of the books with the new ones that we'd read. And then we did it again. So the first thought was like, okay, well, let's do a better version of this. Instead of 50, let's do 100. Instead of like a paragraph on each, let's do like 1,000 words on each. So the first step of writing the book was like writing those 100,000 words, 100 down to one, best books, 1,000 words on each. But we got to the end of that within like a month. And Jonesy was like, cool, we're done. I was like, no, we're nowhere near done. This isn't good enough yet. So that was like step one, was like getting everything down on the page, which I think was every step that we took was painful at the time, but in hindsight, fantastic. So like that was like step one was just doing that. We got everything out and down onto the page. Even though it wasn't good enough yet, it was good that it was there. Like it's, if you like think, okay, I've got to write something perfect, you're probably not going to write it. Whereas like it's a lot easier. There's a quote from a guy that we went to like this book writing course. His name is Jerry Roberts. So he said it's a lot easier to edit. What did he say? He said it's a lot easier to edit a bad page than a blank page. If there's a blank page, there's nothing you can do with it. At least we had a bad page that we could then edit. So we had like 100,000 words. We had the basics there. Then we thought, okay, well, this is pretty dry. It's pretty boring. Honestly, I don't want to read it, so no one else is going to want to read it. So we had to like add some life to it. We had to add some spice to it. So we had to add a few personal stories or add a few jokes wherever we could. So it was like trying to punch it up a little bit. So it wasn't just dry and boring, that it was a bit more engaging and a bit more interesting. Then from there, we sent it out to people, actually. We sent it out to maybe 10 people who listened to the podcast and given us some good feedback. And so they basically said, look, the personal stories you've added, they're great, but there's not enough of them. So do more of that. So that was good. We were like heading in the right direction. And they also said, look, you've got like, because we had just like 100 to 1, which was just arbitrarily our ranking. So like you'd have a science book, then a philosophy book, then a business book, then a personal development book, then a finance book, then back to a business book, and then a marketing book. And then like, so it was like just a random mix. And they're like, oh, I kind of like business stuff, but I'm not that interested in this science book that you had. Or someone might say, I love philosophy, but I couldn't care about business. So then we thought, okay, well, how can we like group these in a way that people can get what they want, and like every now and then sample something different, but not be forced to like read every single book. So that's what we thought about. How do we group these different things together? So that was sort of like part of the ongoing development of writing the book, because we started with the dry stuff. we added a bit more life. People said add more life. And then we thought, okay, well, how can we then, from this life that we've added, how can we add even more life by grouping them together? So it was sort of like this ongoing thought of how do we make the book interesting and engaging that people want to read it? Plus, how do we make it valuable that people get what they want out of it? So those probably the things that we kept working on.
When Jonesy said, "Oh, thank God we're done," and you said, "Well, not exactly," why did you say that you weren't done yet?
I threw Jonesy under the bus. He said we're 95% done, which was bad enough. He didn't say we're done, but he said we're 95% done. I think for me, so I'd actually done this a previous book. I'm trying to think it's behind me. I don't think it is. So I'd done this book. The school I went to was a very academic school, churned out a lot of doctors and lawyers and engineers. There was heavy focus on academics. And then I'd sort of like been one of those people that whilst I was there, I was really keen on academics, but then I'd met some of those guys in the library that were like doing the tomato plants and doing business. And then I'd started meeting a few other people who'd gone to the school like a couple of years above me who had gone out on this sort of their own path and done business. So I sort of like put together this small book. I think it was like 160 pages of a few interviews with some of the people that just like didn't follow the traditional path. They didn't like study hard, become a doctor, and then work for 40, 50 years. They had started their own business and done something a little bit differently. So just by going through that process, by doing that one small book, I knew like once you finish writing the words, there's a lot more that goes into it after that. So I think that because I'd sort of gone down that path before, I knew that, okay, this is like step one of 300 steps. And like, yeah, we're probably almost done this part, but there's a lot more to come.
That book sounds so fascinating. What did you learn from interviewing so many people who didn't go down the traditional path?
I think it was like, for me, it was like the perfect time as well, because I wasn't doing that myself yet. I'd say I'd almost be worthy of having my own chapter in that book at the moment. Whereas at the time I was definitely like, I was thinking about it, but I hadn't done anything about it. So for me, it was almost like the selfish endeavor of like learning from these guys, like networking with these 6 or 7 dudes who had done awesome stuff and learning how they did it. And a lot of it, like one guy was like a billionaire who's like got this massive company who obviously there's so many business lessons you can take from him. But for me, it was like trying to boil it back down to the basics, I guess, for like a 21-year-old to learn from, or a 17-year-old in high school to learn from as well. Like, what are some of the basics that you can do? So it wasn't like thinking about, the hundreds of $1 million mergers and acquisitions and like different corporate strategies that you should be employing to build your business up. It was more about like the smaller individual level, like approaches or philosophies or behaviors or attitudes that you can take to like being the type of person that is going to go and take a risk and is going to go and try something a little bit different to everybody else.
So what were some of those mindsets?
Definitely was always have a crack. Always just try something. So that's probably where, you got an idea for a sock business, go out and try it. You could easily like talk about it and think about it and hang out with mates and say, hey, I've got this awesome idea. And they say, yeah, good stuff. That's a great idea. Pat yourself on the back, but never actually do anything about it. So actually taking some action and doing something is vitally important. So like set up a shitty little website, set up the Stripe recurring payment system, contact the suppliers, like actually doing stuff is vitally important, not just thinking about it. So that was definitely one of them. One of them was also definitely thinking about what's the downside that we've sort of spoken about a little bit already. Like what's the benefits you're going to get out of it, even if it doesn't work. And then I think thirdly is just like not worrying too much about what other people think. So obviously some people are going to be scared of what other people think. Some people would look at the sock club story and say, oh, you're such a loser. You tried this, it didn't work. You had 2 people sign up. What a joke. They're probably not the people you want to hang out with. The type of people who think, oh man, that was a cool idea. It was like a cool approach. You didn't quite get there, but maybe the next one, try something else. They're the types of people that you want to hang out with. So not worrying too much about what the people, the Theodore Roosevelt, the citizenship and the man in the arena speech, where, there's people who are in the arena, the people who are slinging mud, the people who are fighting, the people who are scrapping it out, getting a little bit bloody, a little bit sweaty, a little bit dirty. Then there's like the people on the sidelines who are just watching the people do the action and commentating. So that, the Monday morning quarterbacks who said, "Oh, this guy should have done this better." You can't listen to the people on the sidelines. The only people worth listening to are the people who are also in the arena, the people who are slogging it out for themselves, the people who know what it's like in the arena. They're the types of people you should be listening to.
Why didn't you let the outside influences or the noise of the sock club failing get to you?
Yeah, I think it's, I think because I was going into it with the approach that if this is the thing, that's fantastic. If it's not the thing, then it's just going to be another thing like along the way. As in, if this doesn't work, then I'll be on to the next thing. So not like investing all your, like not pushing all your chips onto the table for this one project. Not saying this is it. If this works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, I'm giving up and that's it. Just knowing that like this is one small bet. And if it pays off, fantastic. If it doesn't pay off, I've still got all these chips in my back pocket that I can use to try for the next one.
I love it. Going back to that poker analogy where you worked at the casino.
That's it.
That's great. Well, this has been an incredible conversation interview. I'm really grateful for you, Adam. This is just, I've learned so much, and your energy, man, it's infectious. And so I'm grateful for that. And hopefully people listening felt that as well. Where can people find more from you?
Definitely. Well, mate, just before I do, just thanks to you as well. I know you, I listened to a bunch of your podcasts before chatting to you today. And I know that you said part of your sort of preparation is trying to go deep, trying to find the things that maybe they talk about a little bit, but never really dive into, which I think I've definitely had the opportunity to do today. I've probably mentioned like the tutoring business before, but I've never really gone deep into it like I have now. And I even like learned a few things myself just from like rehashing, going back through that. So thank you so much for that, man. It's been fantastic to chat. I think the best place, whatyoullearn.com. You can check out the podcast. You can get the free top 50. You can get the free introduction. The book, The Shit They Never Taught You, is up there at the moment. That's obviously the thing we're plugging the hardest at the moment. But yeah, there's also a whole bunch of free stuff that you can check out there too.
Awesome. And we'll link it down below. Thank you again for your time. And I'm incredibly grateful for you, my friend.
Thanks so much, mate. It was awesome to chat.